Kevin Kenson released a video a while back titled The Most Important Nintendo System Right Now. And in that video, he sung the praises of Nintendo's last dedicated handheld, the Nintendo 3DS series. And one of the things that worried him was that we are seeing DS and 3DS game prices reach a new baseline, and it's only going to get more expensive as time goes on. So let's see if he's right. Welcome to Retronomics, the series that follows price trends in video games and calls out big YouTubers for clout. All jokes aside, I am a big fan of Kevin Kenson's work, and his production value is something that I strive to emulate, and while I don't have a fancy studio, I make do with what I have. And the other thing about Kevin's videos that I like is that he always has interesting ideas and he supports his arguments with evidence, something that seems to be lost on a lot of other YouTubers. And this past video prompted me to respond to it. So let's talk about Nintendo DS and 3DS prices. This won't be as in-depth as my GameCube video, but perhaps over time I can add games to it as time goes on. But first, here's how Retronomics works. I get all of my pricing data from pricecharting.com, and I also take a look at eBay sold listings as well to make a determination on where the prices of the games are going to go. Are they going to go up, down, or stay the same? All games listed are retail complete in-box prices and are North American versions. The prices are accurate as of the recording of this video, which is September 15th, 2021. So let's talk about the Nintendo DS and 3DS. We'll focus on the DS first. And since July of 2020, 412 out of the 1,800 items on Price Charting's DS list rose in value at least 40%. Now, this isn't too far out of line when you look at other console libraries. I mean, it's not uncommon to see 20% of those items rise that much over this past year. However, what is uncommon is to see games rise in value more than 100%. The past consoles that I have forecasted on this channel maybe had one or two, but the Nintendo DS had 87 games rise in value 100% in value or more, and 2 games that rose in value over 1,000%. Now, those 2 games are Veggie World and Aqua Panic. However, when you do look at the actual previous sales, they don't come up very often. Aqua Panic only has 1 sold listing since April of this year, and Veggie World has 5 sold listings this year, with the last one in June. So not a lot of sales to get a good gauge of where the price is going, but it is pretty obvious, judging by the previous listings, that somebody took a chance and put these games up for an obscene amount of money, and some rube bought it, setting a future precedent for the price. I fully expect a graded version of these games to sell for millions in 20 years. That was a joke. Maybe. The rest of these games that have quadrupled in price seem to be random shovelware games like Harvest Time Hop and Fly, and when I say quadruple, I mean they were $8 last year and now they're $30 to $60 now. So not exactly unobtainable, but a bit more expensive than people might be wanting to pay, especially if you are a completionist. When you ignore the percentages and look at the total dollar increased amount, 21 games increased $100 or more in the past year, which seems to be a bit more in line to the other consoles that I've covered in the past. And they're games that actually sell every couple of days instead of games like Power Bike, Veggie World, and Aqua Panic. So with those stats out of the way, let's jump into some DS games. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is a game from Capcom about a detective who needs to solve a murder, his own. This game is a very unique concept because you need to use your spirit to possess objects which do different things to solve puzzles. The game has skyrocketed in value since the start of the pandemic, from $40 in February of 2020 to $130 as of the recording of this video. It's a unique title which has no real indication on whether or not not it's going to be released on modern hardware, but you can get it on iOS, but it does contain in-app purchases. The DS version is leveling out in price, but it is likely to continue to rise in value as it is a quirky title and a later DS title, if that, because it came out just as the 3DS was coming out. So I'd keep an eye on this one and buy it when you see a good deal. Professor Layton and the Curious Village is part of a beloved series that has sold a ton, and the price reflects that. It's incredibly inexpensive for the depth that this game provides. It's a puzzle game, which is great for mobile gaming. The price hasn't been affected by the pandemic and has been below $20 for ages, so I'd pick it up now and not regret it. Contra 4 has peaked in price in June. Now, Contra 4 has been a desired game for a very long time as it does capture the 2D Contra spirit of old. This game has always been somewhat expensive, but due to the recent pandemic spikes, games of popular franchises have seen increases. Contra, Silent Hill, the list goes on. I would probably pick this up now rather than later, as Konami is pretty spotty when it comes to releasing their back catalog on modern hardware. Little Red Riding Hood Zombie Barbecue. Now, this game is one of the hidden gems on the platform. It has a quirky name, it's a shoot 'em up that takes advantage of the two screens of the Nintendo DS, and it's a really off-the-wall game that didn't get a lot of raving reviews when it was first released. But if you want to feel really salty about the current price, IGN listed it as number 6 on their top 25 DS games under $20. Yes, there was a time when this game was $20 new. Today, that game fetches a crazy high dollar amount, and is it worth the high price tag? Well, I personally don't think so, but if you're a completionist, picking it up now would probably be a good idea. Next up is Chrono Trigger. Now, a lot of people point to the Super Nintendo version as the more desirable one, but as loose copies of that go for over $200, other versions have started to see increases as well. The DS version is considered the best version of Chrono Trigger out there, with the included cutscenes from the PlayStation 1 version, a better translation, and quality life improvements as well. Like the other games in 2021, this price peaked in April and will probably remain around $100 complete for the foreseeable future. The game is available elsewhere, like on PC, but if you want the best version and you want it physical, probably a good idea to set an alert for a price that you're comfortable with and pull the trigger. Super Princess Peach. Ever wonder what it would be like if Princess Peach got her own game instead of just being a playable character in other Mario games? Well, wonder no more. Super Princess Peach puts Peach in her own game with her own game mechanics that aren't found in any other Mario game. It doesn't look like we'll get a sequel or a remake for modern consoles, so this version has had wild swings in price in the past couple of months, with sold listings all over the place depending on the condition. This is one to keep an eye on, but not urgently purchase if money is tight, but I would still keep priority high on it. Dokapon Journey is a board game RPG. That doesn't really sound interesting, and Metacritic seems to agree, so why is it so expensive? Well, it's published by Atlas. Dokapon Journey is sought after mainly because of that Atlas logo in the corner, but also because it is an RPG. The Dokapon Kingdom game for the Nintendo Wii is also pretty valuable, so it's not really a surprise that a similar game on a similar platform is seeing high prices. The game has dropped more than $100 in value since its peak in May, but it will probably remain between $150 and $180 for the foreseeable future. So if you have deep pockets, it's probably a good idea to pick this one up now. Next up, Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. Now, despite its high Metacritic score, it was not what a lot of people wanted out of a handheld Zelda game. It had cel-shaded graphics of Wind Waker, which weren't popular at the time, and it relied heavily on the stylus to not only move Link around but attack as well. And this made the game quickly go into the bargain bin, but recently the price has spiked. However, not as much as other Zelda titles that I have covered. It fluctuates between $30 and $40, and I'm sure that's where it will be for the foreseeable future. I do think that this is one game that will ultimately settle down in price, so you don't have to add this one to your collection just yet. Retro Game Challenge is based on a Japanese TV show where contestants need to complete retro video game challenges, hence the name. And this is a game that flew under a lot of people's radar, but it is still a game that remains relatively inexpensive. Not really rising too much during the pandemic, I think picking it up now for the price it's currently going for isn't such a bad idea. Just don't expect it to drop in price though, as that Xseed logo tends to keep value steady. Trauma Center Under the Knife 2 is a surgery simulator that's also a visual novel, and hey, it's published by Atlas, but it's not that expensive. I know, I'm as shocked as you are. Trauma Center games have actually sold fairly well in North America. There are 4 games on the DS and Wii, but this game didn't really sell all that well, which is why it's higher than the rest of the games in the series. It is, however, on its way back down, and I think you can wait just a little bit longer to see if it will drop further. Yes, I know it's an Atlas title, but it isn't a platformer or RPG, so I think you'll be okay. With those DS games out of the way, let's take a look at some Nintendo 3DS stats. And the 3DS library is a bit more in line with the rest of the consoles that I forecasted. 137 out of 519 items listed, or 26% of the 3DS library, increased 40% or more, and 35 games increased over $100. However, the games themselves haven't really increased substantially. The top change in price are all dominated by the plethora of Nintendo 3DS variants that are out there. I really wish that I had bought that Hyrule 2DS XL when I had the chance. But when you take all of the consoles out, no games increased in value more than $100. Alien Chaos 3D is the only game that came close at $90, followed by Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker. Now let's jump into 10 3DS games. Shin Megami Tensei 4 is published by Atlas, and it's an RPG, so naturally it's going to be expensive, right? Well, wrong. Even though this is part of the Shin Megami Tensei series, which has developed a cult following over the years, the 4th game in the series for the Nintendo 3DS is actually seeing a drop in price as time goes on. I think it's because these games are on people's radars now, and so when they're released, people rush out to get them or risk having to pay for it down the road. I would probably pick it up now since the 5th game in the series is coming out for the Nintendo Switch, and it might cause a bump in value. Rayman 3D is actually Rayman 2, but in 3D, and it's also available as Rayman DS, so it's super inexpensive. The price is probably what it will be like for the foreseeable future, so pick it up if you fancy. I mean, I figured I'd throw people a bone with some inexpensive good games now and then. Next up is Spirit Camera. Now, no joke, I bought this game for $4 at GameStop because I needed an extra game for that buy 3 get 1 free deal. Spirit Camera is a spin-off of the popular Fatal Frame series, and it takes advantage of the 3DS's cameras to create a truly unique experience. The announcement of the Fatal Frame games coming to the Nintendo Switch has people buzzing about the game, and it has quadrupled in price. I would wait a bit on this one because I don't really see it sustaining the new price for very long. The game is limited in scope and loses its gimmicky appeal very quickly. Next up is Cubic Ninja. Now, why is this generic Ubisoft title on here? Well, it used to be sought after because of a known exploit that would allow the 3DS to be unlocked to play homebrew games. Now, there are other means that don't require a specific piece of software that not a lot of people have access to. Still, Cubic Ninja is a cool piece of history that you can get for $12, and that price isn't going anywhere, so you can take your time. Cave Story is another game that was expensive, but now not so much, mainly because of the Nintendo Switch port of this game. Sure, it isn't in 3D like this one is, but it is essentially the same game, which was actually a port of the Steam version. There was a recent spike in this game, but it is subsiding, and I don't think that the game is particularly rare, but it is a fun game, and you could probably snag it for what price charting has it currently listed for. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D. I figured I'd throw in another budget title for all you collectors out there. Ocarina of Time is a lot of people's favorite Zelda. It's not mine, but it is an excellent game, and this version has improved visuals and creature comforts like gyro aiming, and it takes advantage of the dual screens. It's arguably the best way to play Ocarina of Time, and best of all, it won't break the bank. Fire Emblem Fates Conquest remains a very affordable Fire Emblem game. The series has taken over Nintendo's plate as of late, but if you like this series, then you can't go wrong with this title. The price has remained consistent since it was released, and I don't really see it spiking anytime soon. Will it be more expensive in the future? Well, that's really hard to say. I can't see it climbing higher, at least until the eShop shuts down and you can no longer buy it digitally. Kid Icarus Uprising is a launch game that has started to attract a lot of people who dismissed it when it first came out. A complete copy, the one with the stand and the AR cards, are starting to get harder and harder to find, and the price is reflecting that. Price charting lumps a lot of the copies with just the box but not the other items included, so it is deceiving. If you are interested in collecting 3DS games, this is probably something that you should buy now rather than later, because as time goes on, those included pieces are starting to become scarce. Yokai Watch 3 is one of the last 3DS games. The Yokai Watch series was supposed to be the next Pokemon, but it didn't quite catch on the way that Pokemon did here. The third game in the series reached the United States 3 years after the Japanese version, and by that time the Switch had already been in full swing. This is probably one of the most sought after titles, and it will continue to be so as time goes on. End-of-life games that also didn't sell well tend to be elusive. Probably a good idea to keep an eye out for a price that you're comfortable with and buy sooner rather than later. Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate recently spiked, probably due to its name recognition. This game was $15 for the longest time, and the Lords of Shadow era of Castlevania didn't really gel well with people at the time, but the recent spike has caused the price of this game to quadruple over the year, but it is starting to go back down. I feel that this will eventually drop back down to near pandemic levels in the next year or so, and that's why I would move this game's priority down lower. So there you go, Nintendo DS and 3DS game forecast. Despite certain games for the Nintendo DS seeing insane jumps in value since the start of the pandemic, it does appear that the game prices are starting to settle down, and we'll probably see them level out for the remainder of the year. But what about Kevin's claims that these games are going to be incredibly expensive in the future? Well, I think that we'll have certain titles get really expensive for sure, but I don't think that it's right to say that they'll all be expensive. I mean, just because they can't be ported to the Nintendo Switch or other modern platforms, we already have some games that are available on the iOS platform. And while they're not exactly the same, it does go to show you that with some proper motivation that these games can work on modern platforms. Obviously, Nintendo published games will be locked on Nintendo consoles, but there are a lot of Nintendo games that aren't available on the Nintendo Switch, and while some of those games are kind of expensive, the others remain obtainable. And there are some games that were ported to the DS and 3DS from home consoles, so it's not like the games require the hardware to function. But that doesn't mean that they won't be expensive in the future. I mean, as time goes on, some of these games are bound to increase in value as nostalgia increases and the digital shop closes down, reducing the availability of these games. So if you do see something that you like and you can afford it now, don't sleep on it because you will regret it later. Let me know in those comments below what you think about DS and 3DS prices. Will you be collecting them now at a higher priority? And what games did I miss? Let me know. If you liked this video, give it a like and share it with those who might find it interesting. And if you are new here, consider subscribing for future content. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Nicktendo. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Super Nicktendo, and I'll see you next time.